All right, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the WEAC TCTAC Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. We're going to be focusing today on designing a resilient hub. My name is Sada Salem, and this presentation will be led by our partners at Clean Energy Group. Next slide. Just some logistics before we dive in. This meeting is being recorded, so afterwards you will be able to view this on our website and we'll get a follow-up email. The recording and presenter slides will also be shared. Please keep yourself muted while the presenters are speaking. If you have questions prior to our Q&A section, feel free to drop those into the chat. And during the Q&A session, your questions will be answered from the chat first, and you can raise your hand in order to ask questions and take yourself off mute. Just a refresher about the WEAC TCTAC and what our mission and goal is. The WEAC TCTAC program is led by the EPA. We are the TCTAC for Region 2, focusing on New York, New Jersey. We aim to build power and knowledge in environmental justice communities, help groups gain access to grants and funding opportunities, support groups' ability to advance and address environmental and energy justice issues in their community, and strengthen environmental justice networks within our region. So we're really happy to have you all here with us today. Next slide. So just a little update of where the TCTACs are located. We are located here in New York City and serve New York and New Jersey. We have a sister TCTAC that serves Puerto Rico and USVI, but there are 15 regional TCTACs and 3 nationwide TCTACs. And on this map, you can see where they're all located. Next slide. So I now pass it to Marielle Mango, who will lead us in our presentation today. And thank you all for attending. Take it away, Marielle.
Hi everyone, I'm Marielle Mango. I'm a Senior Project Director at Clean Energy Group. Clean Energy Group is a nonprofit organization. Our headquarters are in Vermont, but increasingly our staff are remote and all over the country. We work nationwide with the mission to ensure affordable, reliable, and clean energy for all. The focus of much of our work is based in advancing solar, battery storage, in historically marginalized communities through policy development, program development, project support, and we do a lot around awareness building, like webinars here and different resources I'll reference. So I'm kind of a one-stop shop. The Resilient Power Project is the program I work most on, which specifically works to ensure that solar and battery storage is available and accessible. We do a lot of work around technical assistance, actually supporting folks getting through the solar and battery storage development process, as well as informational resources and working one-on-one with community organizations to ensure they kind of understand what is the landscape for solar and storage, how can I benefit from it, what are the resources I need to help build my capacity and my community's capacity for ensuring local and reliable energy resources. So I've highlighted here on this screen our Understanding Solar and Storage Guide. It's a report that seems pretty serious because there's many pages to it, but I encourage everyone, it's cut up by easily digestible chapters on things like what is solar and storage and what are kind of a variety of concerns. I'll be referencing information from this report a lot, but I just wanted to highlight it in case anyone was looking for kind of an easily digestible resource to further expand their knowledge on these technologies. So some questions that I focused on for this presentation to help answer is what is a resilience hub? What is resilient power, which for the Clean Energy Group description and the purpose of this presentation is specific to solar paired with battery storage. How do I determine the value of solar and battery storage? What are the steps to developing a solar and storage system? What are barriers? How do I overcome the barriers? And then I do a little bit of a deep dive into technical assistance opportunities for community serving organizations and case studies of folks that have actually developed resilience hubs, resilient power for resilience hubs, things like that. So to kick things off, what is a resilience hub? I highlighted here the Urban Sustainability Directors Network definition, which is community serving facilities augmented to support residents, coordinate communication, distribute resources, and reduce carbon pollution while enhancing quality of life. I like it because it's holistic, but I really encourage that folks don't see the term resilience hub and think my project has to fit in this bucket to be a resilience hub. Resilience hubs should be and are developed by the community and defined by the community. So your resilience hub is going to mean something different for you than it means for someone else. And I think the most helpful way of kind of illustrating that is giving examples about how different folks have done different resilience. And then the focus of really my presentation today is the resilient power aspect for resilience hubs. So here you'll see the USDN has identified 5 foundational areas that build community resilience. They include services and programs. So like during regular grid operations, when everything's fine, what are the community programs you're providing? Is there workforce development? Like how does the community use this hub regularly? And then communications. So how do they ensure that folks have access to Wi-Fi, but also has communications in the event of an outage or an emergency? There's a building and landscape, so really facility component. How can we make sure that like we have green infrastructure, energy efficiency, stormwater, like different aspects that you could actually be thinking about how your building and landscape support your broader community. Facility operations and power are really what we're focusing on today. That's Clean Energy Group's kind of bread and butter. And that's really on how can you use solar and battery storage to power your resilience hub in the event of an outage and also create other benefits during regular grid operations that contribute positively to your community and your organization. So, what is resilient power? As I stated, we're defining it as solar paired with battery storage. Battery storage provides the resilience, which is in the event of a power outage, you have access to reliable backup power. And solar ensures that you continue to have access to that backup power through a renewable resource. We do work with projects that are only battery storage, which means that they have a battery installed at their facility. They're unable to, for whatever reason, install solar panels on their roof, and therefore, in the event of an outage, whatever juice that battery has, which is typically 6 to 8 hours, they can rely on that, right, in the event of an outage. But once it's gone, it's gone. So what we really do to define resilient power here is pairing solar with battery storage. So not only do you have access to stored power in the event of an outage, but you have a way to replenish it. So what is battery storage? Battery storage automatically islands from the grid during an outage, which means that your facility can operate independent of the utility grid in the event of an outage. It does not emit pollutants. It can deliver electric bill savings, both during regular grid operations and through demand savings programs, depending on the utility territory you're in. Like I said before, when combined with solar, it operates as long as solar is available, right? And fuel shortages are not an issue. I can touch on this on case studies later, but time and time again, we found that folks that have diesel generators don't have access to diesel in the event of a power outage because of fuel shortages. Even some of our folks that have natural gas backup power generators, there's concern there that pipe infrastructure and things like that. So solar and storage is really just if you have access to it at your facility, assuming the facility is still safe to be operating in and the roof is available, you have access to solar and storage. And lastly, it supports continuity of services. So I'll touch on this later on, but really, what are benefits that this can provide outside of reliability, right? And that's keeping your organization open and operational to provide community services in the event of an emergency. How do I determine the value of solar and storage? So we get this question a lot. And when we work with our community partners, it's really going through the list of battery storage. Typically, folks reach out to us because they say, I know I need reliable backup power in the event of an outage. Either they have a diesel generator and it's just not reliable, they have fuel shortage issues, or they want to start from scratch with battery storage. And we talk a lot about how do you value storage. So there's an economic value, there's maintenance. I like to highlight this because solar and storage is automatic. You can make it automatic. In the event of a power outage, a lot of our partners don't even know the power is out because their solar and storage, it switches to that immediately. It islands, right? And it requires very little maintenance. A lot of our partners who have diesel generators, for instance, have to run them weekly or monthly to make sure that they stay in use and they're up to date. They have a very kind of complicated maintenance structure for hoping they stay reliable. Solar and battery storage requires minimal maintenance. There's some, in terms of operation, there's some training that's helpful for folks to ensure they know how to use it in the event of an outage and kind of toggle off between loads to create it as long lasting as possible. But for the most part, it's connected to what you want it to be connected to and ready to rock. Reliability. Battery storage is incredibly reliable. In the event of a power outage, it kind of does what it's supposed to do. And if there's solar, there's time to charge it. And if there's not, you have a real understanding of when am I going to run out of power based on what this is feeding now. The environment, reduced emissions, and public health and safety. We would do a lot with resilience hubs, health clinics, places like that that really prioritize how can I support medically vulnerable individuals in the event of an outage. So these are folks that would otherwise have like electricity dependent medical equipment, for instance, an oxygen concentrator. The amount of folks that rush to a hospital because they need an outlet to charge their medical equipment, it inundates a hospital already dealing with like emergency capacity related issues of a power outage. And also it's unnecessary. Folks rather find their support locally. They'd rather go to an institution they trust. So a lot of the resilience hubs and folks that we work with for resilient power systems try to figure out how can I have like a special outlet area for individuals who just need to charge their medical equipment or an extra fridge for temperature regulated medication. There's a lot of considerations there on how you can focus your resilient power system to support public health and safety issues that you know you have in your community. So I like to include this in here because it shows that these value streams that I outlined in this slide are kind of divvied up into monetizable benefits, so things you can put a dollar sign on pretty easily, and then non-monetizable benefits. So it's slightly harder to say like this equates to this savings of me investing in solar and storage for my community facility. This is a case study that I think illustrates that well. We worked with Boulder Housing Partners in Colorado to install a solar storage system. They had an existing natural gas and propane generator, which we incorporated into the system. So everything runs together. It runs more efficiently. You don't have to get rid of your existing infrastructure if you don't want to. This is not like an all or nothing type situation. So everything works together to provide 3 days of backup power to their headquarters office, which the system supports their servers, outlets, heating and cooling, phones, Wi-Fi, EV chargers. The system cost about $145,000, and they had about half of it covered in federal grants. The rest of it was financing and capital from the actual housing authority. But really what I want to focus on is you can see in the chart that the monetizable benefits here are that they're saving about just over $1,100 a year in their electricity bills. This is in addition to their demand charge savings. So most folks that have a commercial facility or a facility that uses a commercial meter with their utility has a demand charge. And depending on when you use energy at your facility, that demand charge can be significant. Battery storage is really great for offsetting this. So whereas the solar can help offset utility bills, through like net metering, right? Like you exported this amount to the grid or you offsetted this amount of electricity. Here's how much you saved. Battery storage can kind of help with this demand charge aspect where it saves energy storage and you can use it at a later time when electricity is particularly expensive. Here, in this case, they saved $450 during a medium to high demand charge month. So they were averaging anywhere from $50 to $500 in demand charge savings per month, depending on the month. And that combined with their utility bill savings could be anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800 a month, which is significant. This particular partner also worked with us to consider their avoided cost of outage. I like to highlight this figure because even though it's not something that you can immediately input into your system savings calculator for solar and storage like you can with the utility bill pieces, it is a calculable, monetizable benefit. So with this particular partner, they said for every hour that we do not have access to electricity, we lose the opportunity to provide services to our residents. We lose opportunities to ensure like continuity of services. We lose some of our backup, like our saved files. When you have an immediate power outage, it usually gets a little screwy with IT systems and IT infrastructure, and you could lose things that way. So they estimated about $2,500 per downtime for every hour that they lost power. And when you have approximately 2.5 hours of power outages a year in Boulder, Colorado, they estimated it to be around $6,200 a year in savings generated by avoiding these power outages. And they were able to use this figure to help justify the economic kind of payback of the system. So what are harder to monetize benefits? If these are kind of like the dollar values that we can say this is going to help us justify an economic positive investment in solar storage, what are other considerations? Emissions reduction. So this particular project offset 40,000 pounds of CO2 over the life of the system. Resilience. I mean, it's hard to put a dollar sign on saving lives, ensuring continuity of services, avoiding the spoilage of food. I mean, solar and storage, whatever you hook it up to is what it's going to receive backup power. And for most of our resilience hub partners, that means either full facility, they want everything backed up, or at least what we consider their critical loads. So the most important things they need: refrigeration, common area lighting, heating and cooling to a community space, right? So if there's extreme temperatures, folks can access heating or cooling depending on the time of year. Phones, Wi-Fi, like you can kind of narrow it down. And in that way, your battery storage often lasts longer because it's only connected to certain loads versus your entire facility. In this particular case, they did their entire headquarters was was powered through solar and storage. And then avoided emissions. So their initial plan was to install a larger gas generator. And by doing solar and storage, it kept their existing to add a little bit extra redundancy and backup power, but they didn't have to invest in a larger one, which further offset emissions. And they actually used the estimated savings for not having to install a new gas generator and the the fuel associated with propane deliveries in this calculation. So now that we know what solar and storage is and how it can benefit us, what are the steps to developing a solar and storage system at your facility? And again, we work with like a huge array. It could be a food pantry, a church, it's whatever community serving institution wants to continue to serve their community in the event of an outage. But this kind of step process works regardless. So we kind of learn what is your motivation for resilience so we can set expectations. If you're interested in being a cooling setter, for instance, that's going to be a lot bigger of a battery than if you're interested in maintaining refrigeration for vaccines only and some backup power, right? So by learning what is it that you're interested in supporting with backup power, we can folks should really work with an engineer or a community organization like Clean Energy Group to figure out what are my expectations, how can solar and storage really serve me, what's economic, what's kind of in the reality of a wheelhouse. Project planning. So where would you be able to house it? Most battery storage is about the size of a fridge. People usually like more than one of them. I've worked on container level size battery storage projects for really large multifamily affordable housing and hospitals that want to have extra long resiliency. For the most part, that's not the case. For the most part, our community partners can put their battery storage on the side of their building outside or in a utility space in their facility. Work together on funding. So are there grants available? Are there incentives available? How can we pay for this? And then really implementing the project. So what would it look like to develop solar and storage? What would it cost? And how would it benefit the community? I like to highlight here that to successfully seek funding and move towards project development, project teams typically need to know the system size, the cost and the maintenance costs, the estimated lifetime savings, and the benefits of the system. So those monetizable and harder to monetize benefits I mentioned before. This is an example of when you are actually developing your solar and battery storage project. What I think is the best options to see when you work with an engineer or developer, and that is multiple options. So I'll dive into a little bit of Clean Energy Group's role in technical assistance later on, but this is what our reports look like when we support community institutions in developing solar and battery storage projects. So I like to have a full assessment of the facility. So how could solar and battery storage be installed at this facility and what would that look like? And there's three different options for that. One is solar only. So if you just did solar, which would result in no backup power, but usually good economics because you're not installing battery storage, and solar offsets utility bills. So we like to give that as an option without the resilience. Most of the folks we work with like solar and storage. So the solar and the small battery option is typically what I call an economic option. It means you get to have some storage. It's going to provide some backup power, but it's a battery that's really sized to take advantage of incentives and utility bill savings. And have a better payback. So you can see in this particular example, the small battery has a simple payback of 7.5 years, um, and provides really limited resilience. You can see it's really not applicable at the bottom. And for this particular case, it was such a small battery, it provided really good uh, utility bill savings and offset emissions, but not a ton of backup power. The resilient power scenario is typically how can we size a battery to really highlight backup power? So, really value the resilience that battery storage can provide through ensuring that you have access to electricity in the event of an outage. And in this case, the 72-hour battery only had a 4-year payback because of the amount of incentives and grants that are available. And I can dive into some of those a little bit later on to help show affordability. But the focus really of this slide is when you are working to develop a solar and battery storage project, try to get multiple scenarios. You should be able to, working with a developer or technical assistance provider, see what it looks like just to do solar, see what it looks like to do an economic battery that provides some backup power, and then see what it looks like to do a more robust, perhaps more expensive, less economic system that really provides your optimal backup power and resilience preferences. So, what are the barriers, right? Like you're learning how to develop this project, you're ready to start exploring solar and storage for your facility. What can get in the way? This slide, the associated graph I have here is from a report that Clean Energy Group did a couple years ago, where we surveyed about 75 of our community serving partners, from multifamily affordable housing to municipalities to senior centers and schools and pantries, kind of a wide berth of partners, to see what is stopping you from developing solar and storage. The top two responses were related to capacity and technical assistance. So I don't have enough information about battery storage to be able to have a real understanding of how it's going to benefit my facility. There's some technical issues I'm seeing, like I don't know how it's going to hook up. I don't know what it'll support. These are kind of that capacity and technical bucket of I don't know how to get my project even off the gate because I don't have enough information to start it and I don't know where to go for my first step. From there, a lot of these are actually in getting your project built. So permitting and interconnection issues, these are things where like you're installing your solar and storage system at your facility and now you have to connect it to the grid. That can be difficult depending on where you live. And so these issues can sometimes be expensive. They can delay a project. We're working on a project in California that has been delayed. Their battery storage has been sitting in its installed and sitting in there for like a year while they wait for California to interconnect it. So this is not a small issue. Um, Lack of financing and economic feasibility go hand in hand as a major issue. Either folks are finding that because of where they live, the battery storage, there's not enough savings incurred from it to really help economically justify the project, which means basically if you have a payback of your system or the system won't pay for itself in under 20 years, it's considered not financially viable, which means if you did this, you'd be valuing the benefits of resilience and why you want solar and storage in your community without really expecting for the system to pay for itself in a realistic amount of time. And lack of financing options. We work with so many folks that just either the financing is exploitative and really high interest rates, or they don't really know where to go. And there is increasingly more and more financing options available for folks, especially nonprofit organizations, but this can be a big hurdle. And then the rest of these are kind of around uncertainty with how do I engage with a battery storage installer or solar installer? Are there safety concerns? And how do I access my energy usage data? So some points on overcoming economic barriers. Currently, and this is still true, there's federal tax credits called the investment tax credit. And what that really aims to do and why it was developed was specifically to spur solar and battery storage adoption and growth at community serving facilities that serve the most vulnerable populations. So there's a 30% baseline incentive that everyone gets if you're installing solar and storage, whether you're residential or a business or commercial or whatever, you get 30%. It basically means 30% of your total project costs received back to you as a tax credit. Now you can stack on top of that these other options. There are 10% bonus credits for projects located in energy communities, which are There's a map for energy communities that can be found online, but it's typically communities, environmental justice communities, communities that have historically been disenfranchised from participating in clean energy development, either because of lack of employment opportunities or there's some brownfield considerations. It's a wide category. And then there's also a 10% bonus credit for domestic manufacturing. So if you buy locally. There's a 10% bonus credit for projects located in low to moderate income communities and tribal communities and native nations. And then there's a 20% low to moderate income bonus credit for projects that support low income residential projects. I'll highlight here, there's a wide number of eligibility criteria for the 20% credit. So I encourage you to dive into resources to learn more. But a lot of how we're seeing this as is multifamily affordable housing and kind of community solar projects where you have a certain percentage of the revenue from the solar being directly allocated to residents. So like we worked with a multifamily affordable housing project where 20% of the solar revenue was distributed to the residents. Each apartment received the equivalent of like, I think it was like $60 reduction on their utility bill every month. But I should note these can be significant. So some of them are stackable, some of them are not, but you can get anywhere from 30 to 70% of the project covered through investment tax credits. And that's not even including whatever your state has existing for solar and battery storage credits. A lot of places in the Northeast, Hawaii, California have really robust incentives, and any grants that you have. And because they passed the direct pay option, it means that nonprofit organizations, which used to have to jump through hoops to access these investment tax credits and through like these complicated equity ownership structures, that doesn't have to be anymore. Basically, the direct pay incentive means even if you don't have you don't file taxes because you're a nonprofit organization, you can access these benefits by basically getting a check in the mail. They'll send you the equivalent of a check. There's a process for applying for it, but on average, 12 to 18 months from when your project is installed, you should receive whatever you qualified for, that 30 to 70% in offsetting costs as a check to you back in the mail, which is huge. Overcoming safety concerns. So there's a lot of, I think, rightfully so concern and then some misinformation about battery storage and fires, specifically for lithium ion batteries, which are commercially right now it's like a Tesla Powerwall. It's the most readily available technology. They're overwhelmingly safe, right? But that there's always, it's really important that our folks that do permitting, folks that fire departments are trained on fire suppression efforts, that you work with your local permitting and code folks to make sure that wherever this is being sited is easily accessible for fire suppression and that everyone understands how to operate the actual system. I'm focusing really the next couple of minutes of the presentation on technical and capacity barriers. So I highlighted earlier on that we found with our partners that overwhelmingly one of the biggest issues people came to us with was saying, I don't know how to get my foot in the door. I don't know where to start. I feel like if I understood solar and battery storage better as an organization, and if I had kind of technical knowledge for what it would look like to install solar and storage at a particular facility, I would be better equipped to then go forward and fundraise, look for financing, figure out next steps, but I don't know how to get my foot in the door. And if you're trying to develop a resilience hub and you want resilient power for it, but you don't know how to go about developing it, that can be a major hurdle. And I know a lot of our community partners, especially those serving historically marginalized and low income communities, most people don't want to just go out and call a solar contractor that they don't have a relationship with or a battery storage developer they don't have a relationship with. They want to see kind of a unbiased third party vendor agnostic technical support that they can get to educate themselves, build up their knowledge about their facility, and then go forward. So this chart on this slide just is another way of showing kind of the responses we got from that initial survey, which showed that about 60%, a little bit more than 60% of respondents had little to no or to some knowledge of solar and battery storage resources. In my experience, a lot of our partners have a pretty good handle on solar, but battery storage is a newer technology and how battery storage works with solar is a newer concept. And that's been a lot of what our focus is on building capacity. So there are a lot of ways you can have technical assistance. Through the TCTAC, WEAC has awesome partners that work on a variety of different types of technical assistance for projects. There are technical assistance for solar and storage that exist in states by nonprofit organizations. There are some federal programs, especially if you're Indigenous community or Native nation, that you can access funding for. What I'm going to focus on is Clean Energy Group's Technical Assistance Fund. This is a program that I lead that really it's nationwide, and the purpose is to get through the barrier of what we discussed earlier, which is how do I get my foot in the door of developing solar and storage for my resilience hub, for my community center, for my health. How do I do this? Where do I start? And the purpose of the Technical Assistance Fund is to do just that. So we basically provide one-on-one expert support as well as small grant awards that are awarded to engineers to actually conduct solar and storage feasibility assessments in an individual facility. So basically, you'll be able to work with an engineer who's vendor agnostic. It means there's no sales pitch, right? We're not saying use a Tesla Powerwall, use this. It's like a market average cost for solar and battery storage. And it's what would this look like at your facility? Here are the economics. Here are applicable incentives. Here's what it could back up and what it realistically shouldn't back up, how long the backup power it could provide. It's a comprehensive report of now you know how solar and storage can serve your facility. You have, through that process, gained an understanding of solar and battery storage technologies and processes that you feel more comfortable moving forward with. And then most of our partners use that report to then either do an RFP for engineering partners to install the system, to work for financing, to apply for grants. It's kind of like that first big step in making a project a reality. We have awarded $2 million in funding for communities over the past 10 years. Worked with almost 400 facilities and hundreds of community partners in creating a scope of work that makes sense for them. And we are still providing support. For some of our partners, it takes years to get these projects off the ground, and we're there to be someone to bounce ideas off of or help apply for grants as necessary and make sure these projects actually get built. I wanted to also highlight for those of you that are working on resilience hubs or clean energy projects where you're interested in a community solar component. So basically, all right, solar and storage at this one facility sounds great. I'd also like to have a community solar option, which means that you can develop a much larger array where folks from the community can actually have their buildings, their own, this is usually residences, their utility bills offset by basically saying, I'm a subscriber to this community solar array, and I'd like to reduce my utility cost by X number of dollars, but I can't have solar on my own roof, so I'm going to subscribe. Clean Energy Group is going to is the technical provider for solar and storage for a particular effort in the pipeline, which will provide the same services I outlined in the Technical Assistance Fund, but for community solar and storage projects. So if anyone's interested in that, I always encourage folks to reach out. And then lastly, highlighting a grant program for capacity building only. So we work with plenty of community-based organizations who say we're really interested in resilience and solar and battery storage, but we're not quite ready to develop a project at an individual facility. And instead, we'd really like to dedicate time and energy to building up our capacity. We want to be able to better communicate solar and storage to our community. We want to be able to incorporate this into an energy efficiency program we have, whatever the reason. And Clean Energy Group does offer this Resilient Power Leadership Initiative Grant Award, which is $10,000 for a year of handholding support and one-on-one assistance in actually building your capacity around clean energy resources. Whereas the Technical Assistance Fund is open year-round. We accept applications 365 days a year. We typically only award Resilient Power Leadership Initiative grants 2 to 3 times per year. So I wanted to save some time at the end to actually show you all how solar and storage can be implemented at different projects, right? So this is a health clinic. It's Crescent Care in New Orleans. It's the largest community health clinic in the area. We worked with them on installing they didn't actually go through the technical assistance fund. We're more of a partner in helping guidance. They installed a massive solar and battery storage system, as well as a backup natural gas generator that works with the system to support operations at the health clinic. What's interesting about this project in particular is that they had a very large diesel backup power system that existed. They tested it regularly, they kind of did everything right. And then Hurricane Ida hit and the system didn't work. It failed, like not just one part of it, every part of it failed. And what happened was when it failed, the health clinic and their community partners lost upwards of $700,000 in temperature regulated medication and vaccines. They couldn't see patients who many of them couldn't had a very difficult time traveling to a hospital because of the flooding that was happening. The whole facility that was otherwise prepared to continue offering services and ready to because they thought they had this kind of backup power set and ready to go had to shut down. And luckily they had other health clinics and facilities that they could rely on, but it was not great. And for them, it kind of spearheaded this idea of how can we explore all alternative, more reliable solutions to make sure that we can stay open and operational through a power outage. They worked with Together New Orleans, which is a great community-based organization that's helping community facilities in Louisiana develop solar and storage at their facilities to create this massive backup power system. And basically, it provides the battery storage alone, not even including solar, would provide 9 hours of backup power in the event of an outage to the entire facility. So we're talking all of the patient rooms, the IT infrastructure. So it's a very big deal for health clinics to be able to have patient files easily accessible. Everything's electronic now. Heating and cooling so that they can maintain safe temperatures for the staff and for the patients, and then refrigeration for food, medication, and vaccines. So these were all priorities that are connected to the solar and storage system. When you pair the solar and storage together, you get well above 9 hours. And then when you pair it with the natural gas generator and they all work together, you're looking at almost a week of reliable backup power for the facility. And they could probably extend that. They could extend that even longer if they kind of turn certain things on and off to avoid depleting the battery too much. So very big project. It cost upwards of $600,000. They received a lot of it through a grant. They financed solar and storage through a power purchase agreement, which worked well for them. And they're seeing upwards of $2,000 a month in utility bill savings. And I should say there have been multiple power outages since this was installed in 2024, and it has remained open and operational, and really hasn't experienced a flicker since then. Here's an example of solar and battery storage at affordable housing. So Maycroft Apartments in DC wanted to create a resilience hub in their affordable housing complex. And for them, that basically meant also having access to their like a community space in the affordable housing complex because they couldn't realistically power the entire however many units of building of apartments are here. So they focused their solar and storage system on a community room. So a room that everyone knew how to access. It was in the building. It had like a kitchen and outlets to charge medical devices. It had a fridge for medication and food and a microwave. The solar and storage system supported all of that, as well as some common area loads like hallway and stair lighting. Might have included an elevator as well. I'd have to double check that. And then heating and cooling for the community space. The backup power provided here is 3 days, so led by Jubilee Housing. The batteries cost about $130,000 and the solar was almost $200,000, so it was over a $300,000 project. They received about a third of it in a grant from their utility. And then I like to highlight this project because speaking of community solar, that's exactly what they did. They said, well, we don't want just the solar array to offset our utility bills and charge the community space in the event of an outage. We wanted to be able to provide direct economic benefit to our residents through reducing their energy burdens, improving the amount of money they actually get to keep and spend on their needs outside of utility bills. So they had a community, they made their solar installation community solar, and their residents are seeing about $40 a month in utility savings, which is a big number. This is a community center, so it's the Petersburg Resiliency Hub, the first resiliency hub in Virginia to be powered by solar and battery storage. The folks in the photo are from United Parents Against Lead. Queen Shabazz is in the center there. She's like a powerhouse of a community advocate that really got most of the solar and storage off the ground through grant funding and panel donation. The backup power for this facility lasts 3 days. It's a community center. The backup power supports the entire facility as well as an on-site restaurant to avoid food spoilage and make sure folks have access to food in the event of an outage. They also offer, speaking of just like how these resilience hubs can offer community services during regular grid operations. Queen and her team provide workforce development trainings. They do like family and education stuff during regular operations. It's like ground up community hub, community resilience. This was a grant funded project, and the economic benefits is the solar and storage is offsetting almost 100% of their utility costs. So they have a very low to no utility bill. Lastly, emergency management. I like to highlight this project because it's one of the ones that we supported that is not actually installed in the facility. It is a mobile solar and storage unit. And we're finding that this version of creating resilience is increasingly popular, or more and more folks are interested in it when it comes to emergency preparedness and disaster response. So this was a project with the emergency management facility, emergency management office in Vieques, Puerto Rico, which is a small island nation off of, small island community off of the coast of Puerto Rico, and Footprint Project and Cell Relief, which were the developers. And it's mobile. So that trailer you see in the photo gets equipped, it has solar panels on top, there's battery storage on the trailer. And what it does is it can basically plug into facilities that have been electrically updated to be able to allow it to plug in, like you would plug in a diesel generator, basically. You plug in solar and storage. So this one was developed to support the entire emergency office on Vieques, but it's also can just be used to power things in the field. So when this emergency management trailer is out and about, it can charge water pumps, which is a huge problem in Puerto Rico. When the power goes out, no one has access to clean water. So it can charge water pumps. It can be used in the field for folks to charge their laptops, for residents to come and access services. It's a really unique way of creating resilience, mobile resilience. And during regular grid operations, they kind of use it just out in the field as they would need to have a movable battery. This project costs about $30,000. It's hard to estimate because a lot of the equipment was donated. Puerto Rico has a lot of donated equipment for a bunch of the projects that we supported, and it was grant funded. So this is I wanted to save the last 45 minutes for questions. This is my contact information if you have any questions. And I also included a link here. Like I said, the technical assistance fund that I talked about today that actually provides upfront comprehensive no-cost support and small grants to engage an engineer to actually develop a project for your particular facility is open. We're accepting applications, and it's a very low barrier process. So if you click that link here and you're interested in applying, our only eligibility requirement is that you are a facility or a community organization that serves low income and or historically marginalized populations, medically vulnerable groups in the event, and you would like to continue providing services through an outage. And basically the idea is you fill out a form, you talk to one of my team about your project, and if it's eligible, we usually have everything ready and rocking to go in a week. It's meant to be very low barrier and to get people what they need to develop these projects quickly. So I would love to open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marielle. The first question we have is, how do you design specifically to meet the needs of medically vulnerable and low-income members of the community?
Sure. So medically vulnerable communities are increasingly a focus of anyone. I mean, you don't have to be a health clinic to have in mind the people who have medical complexities in your community. We work a lot with folks that are developing resilience hubs who say, what are some of the like bare minimum things that we can provide folks so they can avoid hospitalization and find support locally. And what that usually means is outlets for charging medical equipment and having like a specific area for folks to be able to charge their medical equipment. An extra fridge for temperature regulated medication like insulin, things like that. So it's allowing people to come visit a resilience hub just as anyone else in the community could, but ensuring that they have extra resources available to them. I'll note that a lot of our projects didn't really include solar and storage to support heating and cooling because it is such a big load. It usually requires a slightly bigger battery and some more complexities. That's changing, right? So, elderly populations, folks that have mental health complexities, medical vulnerabilities are especially vulnerable to extreme heating and extreme cooling. And so what we're finding is that a resilience hub now usually includes some sort of component of maintaining temperatures if they're going to maintain if they're going to be open and operational through an outage. So oftentimes that's not to an entire facility, it's just to a specific room so that people can come cool down, maybe use their cell phone to call for support or see kind of get an update from communications about where is it at with the outage, where is it at with the emergency updates. So these are all considerations that folks can just use and incorporate into their resilience hub design that is niche enough for medically vulnerable folks to benefit from, but is part of a broader resilience hub that supports the whole community. And then other folks that we work with specifically serve medically vulnerable individuals. So like we work with multifamily affordable housing for seniors, for folks that have disabilities. We work with health clinics and hospitals, obviously, who typically serve the most vulnerable population. And so in those places, we really dive into like, okay, we need to maybe provide heating and cooling to more spaces for longer, more outlets, more refrigeration. Some multifamily affordable housing providers we're working with are doing cool things to actually create backup power in the unit so folks don't have to leave during a power outage. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Awesome, thank you. The next question we have is, what are the ways that you can promote the benefits of workforce development, especially when considering tenants and how they can utilize these services or even be part of the projects?
Sure. So I will asterisk that Clean Energy Group, we are not a leader in workforce development. A lot of people do a lot of great things with workforce development. That project in Petersburg, Virginia, they have a workforce development program that actually ensured that anyone who installed the solar and storage at their facility either learned through the process or was actively apprenticing on the process. And there are increasingly organization like Grid Services and Grid is one, and I think Elevate Energy, IREC, Boss. These are names of organizations that really work on a pipeline of training to apprenticeship to hiring. Because what we saw in energy efficiency a lot was a ton of trainings and then no one really was connected to a job. So a lot of the focus on is if you are going to work with someone and you want to ensure that um, basically your money that's going to them is also being shared with the communities, that they have apprenticeship programs, that they participate in a workforce development program. Or for much larger projects, you can just work directly with an installer like Grid Services, for instance, who develops community solar projects and has pipelines that exist for workforce development trainings and hiring.
Thank you. We have a question about someone is interested in learning about how solar and storage can impact disaster emergency preparedness for local communities. You touched about this a little bit in your presentation, but would you have anything to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So in my case study that I highlighted, the focus was really on, I like to highlight the mobile solar and storage unit because it's a unique application of solar and storage. And a lot of our disaster preparedness emergency management partners really liked, okay, I can use this at my emergency management operations center, or I can drive it out and like support field operations, right? Like the amount of folks in New Orleans, they had a mobile solar and storage unit, for instance, that went out and supported the Red Cross and having folks come in, sign up, make sure they were accessing resources. They rented out portable battery chargers, which could charge at the actual station. All of that requires laptops, access to electricity, a place to charge the batteries, charge the phone chargers, things like that. So it's a cool application, but stationary solar and storage. So typically what we think of with solar and battery storage being installed in an actual facility where that facility sees the economic benefits and it powers those loads is also very popular for emergency management and disaster response. And it can really, there is no, I like to tell folks, there's really no limitations to what solar and storage can support. There are economic realities, right? We don't have a lot of people who are coming in saying sky's the limit for what I can spend. So a lot of our emergency management partners really focus on having as much as they can possibly power for as long to a smaller space. So like communications equipment, we work with some folks that are like totally off grid in rural parts of the country who need lead acid batteries or a different type of battery chemistry outside of lithium ion to because it just works better for their project. So a lot of it is diving into technology considerations depending on if you're remote or not. We work with a lot of fire stations and schools that are interested in EV charging so that they can charge emergency support vehicles in the event of an outage. That is like a whole new thing that hasn't EV charging just in the past couple of years, really 5 years or so, has become really popular. That's something we're including in our technical assistance because who needs to charge their vehicles and be out in the community more than the folks that are providing first responder services, right? So that's another big component.
I see a new question in the chat that I'm going to ask. With the new administration, do you expect that the ITCs to remain unchanged, or will they be reduced or eliminated?
Yeah, so that that's the question, right? I can't predict the future. I will say that right now they exist. There are certain components like the direct pay feature that would be incredibly hard to undo based on how it's written into legislation. I think that, like anything else, the things that are more likely on the chopping block than others are particular carve-outs that serve equity. So, like the low-income carve-outs I spoke to, and the incentives specific for like multifamily affordable housing and energy communities, I would imagine are less popular than a 30% kind of blanket incentive. But what I like to lean into now is that, like, as of right now, these are open and available programs, and we just have to keep working to keep them, maintain that they're open and available, do case studies of folks have taken advantage of these programs and make them as indispensable as possible. But if it was easy as saying, if I think this administration would get rid of them if they could, sure, but it's not that easy, right? And there's a lot that has been put in place to ensure longevity of these programs like this. So.
Um, we have a question I'm going to take from a little bit earlier in the chat. I'm interested in learning. Let me see where I am. Sorry. All right, here we go. Someone wants to know actually how to develop a hub at an urban farm, if you have any ideas around that.
Sure. So we've worked a little bit in Puerto Rico and New Orleans on this. It looks different, I think, depending on what you're trying to support at the farm. So the farm that we supported in Puerto Rico, they wanted to have solar and battery storage support the refrigeration so that when the farmers that they worked with came to them, which they often did, and said, okay, the power's out, we have no place to put our vegetables or any of the produce that we've grown and keep it from spoiling, they can put it there. They had like a co-op model. So they had a really robust refrigeration kind of network that folks could come in, put their food in, and ensure that it doesn't get spoiled until it can go out to the community. Um, Other folks that we've worked with has wanted solar and storage for like small shipping containers on their farm so that they always had access to like a laptop and whatever their irrigation system was. It's really, like I said, the technology isn't limiting. It's how much you want to do. And we've worked with partners who are able to do things as small as power an office at the farm and a fridge to folks who wanted to do much more robust refrigeration. Or even like there's some folks that did like we did a nature center that had like an education component and they wanted that to be solar and storage so that in the event of an outage, even if you weren't a farmer and you weren't using their services during regular grid operations, the community could come and stop by and access fresh food and heating and cooling and things like that. So it's really there's some obviously unique considerations to make sure that the folks that you're serving are served, and a lot of that had to do, at least in our experience, with refrigeration and communications. But sky's the limit depending on the services you want to offer the community in the event of an outage.
Awesome. We actually have a clarifying question. Is light in your building considered a critical load? You did mention higher critical load type of technologies, but could you maybe review that a little bit for the folks online?
Sure. So the difference between full building and critical load is critical loads are what you define as being, I need power to this in the event of an outage. So not every project is going to have solar and storage that's sized big enough to provide backup power for days on end, right? Like the Crescent Care case study is an enormous battery that's supporting a ton of loads, which basically just means a different electrical thing. Anything that's electrical in your building is a load. Lighting, refrigeration, laptops, anything that you need to plug in is a load. A lot of our community partners say, I'd rather have my battery storage last longer for fewer things than I would for it to last a shorter period of time to everything. And that's where we start talking about critical loads. So it's saying, okay, in the event of a power outage, we don't think we're going to be able to be open our entire facility as a resilience hub. So what we're going to define as our resilience hub is critical loads to a community space. So that means heating and cooling is going to be just in this community space. It's not going to be to the whole building. We're going to have lighting to the whole building, but we're only going to have refrigeration available in the community space, right? So you can work with your engineer to pick and choose what do you want to be kept on in the event of an outage, no matter what, and what is I would like to have this available if possible, and what is I don't need to worry about this in the event of outage. We don't need our, we worked with a library once that was like, we have a whole room of uh, education services. Don't worry about that. We want to focus on like the actual library space where folks can come and use heating and cooling. So critical loads is how you define it. If lighting is the most important to you, a lot of people incorporate some kind of lighting, but really it's just what do you want to hook the technology up to and how long do you want it to last? If you do an entire house for heating and cooling for solar and storage, you usually, depending on how much solar is available, it could be 8 hours, it could be 24 hours. If you say, okay, I only want this battery to support my light and 6 outlets, that battery storage could last a week.
Awesome. We've got some great questions coming in, so thank you for taking them all so swiftly. Another question we have is a question around financing and any creative ways to think about financing and best practices for budgeting for Resilience Hub.
Yeah, so right now, I think the biggest hiccup with the tax credits is that they can cover, I mean, even 30% minimum is a huge offset of your price. That means for a $100,000 project, you're going to get a $30,000 amount back to you as a check in the mail for direct pay. Um, but a lot of folks don't have enough money to say, I'll just lay out all of that in advance and wait to get reimbursed, right? It's a lot of money. And so what we're seeing right now is the question of how do we finance that gap for a lot of projects in addition to financing the whole project. So depending on your state, green banks oftentimes have pretty, I think, flexible below market rate and non-exploitative financing options. And Connecticut, for instance, the Connecticut Green Bank has a program that's specifically for nonprofit organizations and multifamily affordable housing providers, where it's like financing solar and battery storage at a lower interest rate than when you would get at like a bank. And they allow for you to do like an early payoff of the tax credits. So you can like finance them as part of your package. You don't have to worry about that money, you being responsible for outlaying it, and then you can pay it off without being penalized for it when the check comes in the mail. There are organizations that focus specifically on working with nonprofit organizations, and I find that their financing mechanisms are really great too. Two examples of that are Revolve and Collective Energy. They are nonprofit organizations that provide financing to nonprofit organizations, and they focus, I don't know if it's exclusively, but I think in the case of Collective Energy it is, and it might be for Revolve too, on solar or solar and battery storage projects. So, um, community development finance institutions, depending on where you live, if you already have a pre-existing relationship with your local community development financing institution versus like a Chase or a Bank of America, many of those are going to have better financing terms, be more flexible on risk, and some are even developing their own green energy programs, which is very cool. I think that that's one of the big questions is making sure that community serving organizations that serve low-income populations have realistic financing options that aren't going to set them further back in paying for their systems because a lot of folks want community ownership, right? Like you can do for solar and battery storage, you could do a power purchase agreement and you could do a lease, which basically means that you don't own the system and you're seeing savings from it or you're receiving the benefit of the backup power in the event of an outage. But a lot of the savings and financial benefit that the system generates goes towards the developer who installed it and owns it. That's fine. And there's a lot of folks that use that because it makes the most sense for them. We have a lot of partners who use a power purchase agreement or lease model for solar and they own their battery storage system. Um, but what we like to focus on at Clean Energy Group is like, what are opportunities for ownership? Because we know our community partners, part of like a just transition is ownership and being able to actually use and rely on the resources in your community. And that case study that I gave with Queen Shabbat Shabazz in Petersburg, Virginia, she grant funded and like got donated materials. I mean, like she put every piece that she could together without having to take on debt, which is incredible. It's harder. Most of the folks that we work with need some sort of financing mechanism, and they would rather that financing mechanism be for ownership, right? So that's when you start to look at who's available, what are the interest rates that are applicable through like Green Bank's community development finance institutions, Revolve and Collective Energy offer lease programs too, and just kind of go from there on what are your priorities and how important is it to you to lay out $0 or lay out minimal money.
Thank you. And maybe if you can share any of those resources for Revolve or the other green financing, we can drop them in the chat for folks who are in our follow-up. We have a question around, I think this is very interesting. Do you know of any cities or states that have established a network of community hubs or resiliency hubs?
Yes, so good examples, Together New Orleans. Also, their name is also Together Louisiana. I don't know if they're just Together Louisiana now, but that is a great example. That Crescent Care facility I shared was their first, they call them community lighthouses instead of resilience hubs. They have a network. I think there's like over 10, maybe over 15 installed right now. And their goal is to have in the urban areas, everyone will be able to walk 15 minutes max to a resilience hub in their community. In a rural area, it'll be like a 10-minute drive, I think is the goal. And they are in a state that's pretty difficult to develop clean energy resources and doing pretty amazing things, ground up, community level, community led, and getting those projects off the ground. So that's a network that is existing today and continues to grow. New Orleans also has the oh gosh, um, I'll link to it. I'll share a link with you to share with everyone too that they have a specific campaign to do solar and battery storage at locally owned restaurants. So like Bourbon Street, places like that. So that in the event of an outage, people can still have access to their jobs and to get paid, their employees. And folks can come in for what is typically discounted or free food from the restaurant, depending on how they work with the city or pay for their meals. But it avoids spoilage, keeps people employed. That's another one that they have done multiple facilities with solar and storage. Um, and then Detroit is another good example. There's quite a few. I'm unsure if I don't think it's like Together New Orleans where it's like necessarily one organization coordinating a network, but they have a lot of individual organizations that have used each other as resources and built upon kind of a foundation of resilient power awareness and development. Ton of facilities being developed at community centers in Detroit right now and churches. Same is true in Baltimore. A lot of work being done at institutions of faith in Baltimore, especially. Glad Tidings is a good example of work being done there. And these are all places that benefit from getting one or two projects done as demonstration sites, basically, and saying like, look at what's possible, look what we're doing, and then having more and more people um, jump on board and be able to participate in that transition. I'm sure there's a bunch of other examples that aren't coming to mind, but it is increasingly, I would look at Oakland too in California has a network of resilience hubs that's being led by an organization, and Urban Sustainability Directors Network supports municipalities in developing solar and storage resources or resilience hubs more broadly. So those are more municipal led type resilience efforts, but that's had quite a bit of traction as well.
Thank you. Another question we have is for CEG, for Clean Energy Group, are you guys based only in the US or do you support other nations?
US and US territories. So US, DC, Puerto Rico, um, we focus there.
Okay. There's also an additional question. Can you share how, if at all, you've worked to support emergency management operations with governmental agencies?
Um, I don't know so much. I mean, with like municipal agencies, sure. Feed the Second Line. That's the name of the restaurant-based organization in New Orleans. If you're interested in learning more about restaurant solar and storage for locally owned restaurants, Feed the Second Line has a network of resilient subs. Um, When it comes to government agencies, most of our work has been with municipalities, or we work with state agencies to develop technical assistance funds. So we had a partnership with Connecticut Green Bank where we developed, they have really, I mean, if you're in Connecticut and you're multifamily affordable housing, their incentives that exist for solar and storage are wild. And I'm hoping that they're adopted elsewhere in New York and New Jersey. Really great examples of incentives there. We work with states. So my colleague Todd at Clean Energy Group, he actually works a lot on actually developing utility and statewide policies that include equity. Because what you see is increasingly there's solar and battery storage incentives, which is great in programs, but there should be an equity carve out. You should always be able to get more money if you are serving and located in a community that has been historically disenfranchised from accessing clean energy resources. So a lot of work is being building on carve outs. But most of our work that in actually developing solar and storage projects at facilities is with first responders or municipalities within that kind of realm.
We have a question around, are there situations where utilities have helped develop resilient power systems at community organizations? And if so, what do those look like?
Sure. So I'm gonna pop back to a case study slide. Uh, This project in DC, their utility, which was Pepco, worked with them to provide a grant to install the battery storage. And part of the partnership there was that Pepco could look to this project as a demonstration project to see how does solar and storage operate, how is it serving the community. It was both a grant to improve resilience, but also a way for the utility to kind of see how is this operating and build their own understanding. So that's a great relationship. If you have a good relationship with your utility, or if, especially if you have a municipal utilities, there's typically a lot more flexibility if you have a municipal utility, to talk about how can we work together to get a project that's beneficial. And you're seeing more and more of that. Where you're seeing incentives pop up are where utilities are recognizing the value of battery storage on the grid. So whereas a community of resilience hub is like, this is great. In the event of a power outage, I have battery storage to keep my facility open and operational. What a utility wants to see is I want to be able to access a network of batteries at different facilities so that during regular grid operations, when everyone's turned on their ACs in the middle of summer, I can draw power from these batteries and basically ensure that we avoid brownouts or blackouts. It's called a virtual power plant, and it's having a distributed network of clean energy resources that you can aggregate together and basically have the equivalent of a power plant on your grid. But instead, they're behind everyone's meter, benefiting them in different economic and resilience ways. So utilities that are interested in developing those programs or have developed those programs are more often to have the incentives, and I think more open to having discussions about what does a project look like and how can we start to explore that. But we have seen a lot of the most innovative stuff in the country has oftentimes come from municipal utilities as well. So a lot of cool things going on there. But I encourage folks to reach out to their utility or their utilities community energy whatever department that they have to see if grants exist, to see if partnerships exist, because it's not a guarantee, and depending on your utility, it's much harder than others. But we've seen projects. Let me see if I have another one on here. We've had another project in the past that they worked with the utility. The utility was, I think they paid for like half of the battery storage array to do similar to what happened here. Be able to learn from it, be able to learn from the process, and be able to see what does it look like to export to the grid? What are different ways that we can kind of manage this? It's basically like a mini demonstration project for them.
Awesome. So we have a question that I've heard a lot, honestly, when talking about battery storage, is there's concerns about safeties The safety of having storage, of course, any press is good press unless it's bad press, honestly. And there's been stories about explosions and things like that. And so, can you point us to any resources or even expand a little bit more about the safety and the ways in which battery technology has advanced to ensure safety of having battery storage near your community?
Sure. So it's definitely there's safety. There's no such thing as like an infallible energy resource, right? Like I think there have been a couple oftentimes they're related fires at like battery storage facilities that are utility scale, so really huge ones or less like in your own home or in a community facility. Not to say that that's impossible, but that's why we're seeing some permitting delays and getting projects off the ground because rightfully so, local governments and fire departments are like, we need to know that we know how to put out this fire because a fire from a lithium ion battery is very different than um, the typical fire that they see, an electrical wiring fire, right? So that's first off, is making sure that fire departments feel equipped and ready. And we're seeing nationwide those efforts are, especially starting in cities and kind of moving from there, are happening. Is that more and more fire departments are learning what they need to know to be able to put out a fire safely and feeling confident in doing so. In terms of actually like trusting that a battery is safe when you install it in your home, there are a couple options. So, or in your facility. Lithium ion batteries are the ones that you see in like kind of the news typically as being having fire. And I just want to underline it is a fraction of projects. So like when you see in the event of a power outage, the one of the leading causes of death from a power outage are people having carbon monoxide poisonings from operating diesel generators ineffectively. It does not stop diesel generators from flying off the shelf in the event of a power outage, right? So I wanted to highlight that because like there's no in the event of an outage, you're not seeing anywhere near the amount of deaths from lithium ion batteries providing backup power as you aren't seeing them compared to someone who doesn't know how to operate a diesel generator. They're putting it in their kitchen, they're putting it in their garage, whatever it may be, and the family's in the hospital or there's fatalities. So, like, just perspective of what you're looking at when you're comparing technologies. The other is like be informed. And if really you're concerned about, we have partners that we work with that are like, I just don't want to touch it. There are other chemistries. Like phosphate is a pretty commercially available battery that is just as good as lithium ion. Sometimes it's slightly more expensive, but a lot of folks are putting those in their home. Lithium ion is not the only type of battery chemistry. It just happens to be the most commercially available because it's the most available right now, but it is not hard. I mean, even for me, when I did solar and storage exploration at my own home, I had multiple options. It wasn't just lithium ion, right? Like they had a phosphate battery that has much less of a concern with that. So do your education, look at your codes and standards, talk to your municipality. But I really encourage folks to look at case studies and see there's always going to be a risk to anything that you do. Do it with someone who knows what they're doing when they install your system and who can navigate the permitting and interconnection in a responsible way. And that's typically people who are certified to do this work. But keep it in perspective compared to what you're seeing at like health and safety risks at power plants, at diesel generators in people's homes, things like that. There's no such thing as a perfect technology, but it is a risk and reward type situation.
Awesome. And you mentioned, which I think is also really important, the opportunity to work with your fire department to make sure that they're ready to know how to properly assess if those fires happen. There's like a workforce development opportunity in that too. So something to consider. And we can definitely, I know that CEG has a lot of resources on battery storage that we can put in our follow-up email or maybe drop in the chat some of those pre-recorded videos around battery safety. We
Yeah,
actually, oh,
just
go
a
ahead.
note, we have a webinar that I can share with you all from this he was a captain of a fire department in Vegas for decades and decades. And when he retired, he decided what I'm going to do is train other fire departments on fire suppression for battery storage. And that kind of effort where you have someone who's years of fire experience training other folks on how to do things. That's how you build capacity and confidence and make sure that everyone feels, equipped and ready. But this is a new technology. So, there's going to be new things that need to be addressed.
Awesome. We don't have any more questions in the chat, but I do welcome our guests. We have about 15 minutes left if anyone wants to take themselves off mute or add more questions into the chat. we get the amazing brain of Marielle for at least another 14 minutes. So welcome folks to take themselves off mute or raise your hand and ask additional questions.
And if you don't have questions now, this is my contact information. And like I said, the Technical Assistance Fund, if you have a facility and you're like, I definitely know I'm ready for solar and storage and I need to figure out next steps, click the link, fill out the form, and we can reach out to you. We're always around for support.
Um, Good afternoon. This is Allison Martinez. I wanted to ask if you had any more examples of the mobile unit. I think for me, that at least for our organization, that might be something we could consider. It seems like a easier lift. So just interested in what else you have.
Sure. So I don't have another case study available, but I would point you towards the Footprint Project. If you just Google Footprint Project, battery storage, they'll come up. They're a developer specifically for solar and battery storage trailers like this. They have done immense amount of work in Puerto Rico, North Carolina. If there is a hurricane or a tornado or a natural disaster, they're out there with these trailers. And they develop them really, they work with all the community-based institutions to be like, how do we do this with donated materials and limited amount of fundraising? I mean, what they're able to do is incredible. They're a great resource, and Clean Energy Group, our website, if you look at webinars, we have a bunch. If you just if you just type in the search bar Footprint Project, outlining how they develop projects, where they have projects, and what those look like. But they're a great resource for even just diving into a little bit of what this looks like. And the Technical Assistance Fund, we can support exploration for solar and storage development of a trailer. It doesn't have to be at your actual facility. It could be, we want to know how this works. There's considerations for like it has to plug in, right? So there is some coordination with the facility that would have to work if you want to be able to plug it into a resilience hub type structure. But some people don't. They want to be able to plug it in somewhere they can charge it and then use it in the field the entire time, which is also an option. And we work directly with Footprint Project on those assessments.
Thank you very much.
Also, if Marielle, you want to pull up the last slide, we do have a survey for folks if you want to, while we wait for more questions to come in, to give us feedback on these sessions. We're really grateful to have Marielle and the CEG team be part of our We Act TCTAC, but also any feedback you can give us will always make our virtual webinars much more responsive to the needs of our community. So if folks don't mind taking that QR code, that would be greatly appreciated. But yeah, any more questions, please feel free to take yourselves off mute or drop it in the chat. I can read it.
I should note, if anyone happens to be in upstate New York, Clean Energy Group will be in the Adirondacks, Lake Luzerne with ANCA, the Adirondack. Oh my gosh.
Network Clean. I should know. They're one of our.
Yeah, we'll be doing myself and my colleague Abby Ramanan, who works on energy infrastructure transition, so like power plants to solar and storage or offsetting that type of work. We'll be at the Adirondack North Country Association. I should know that, I'm from upstate New York. Left my mind for a second, but we'll be doing a training there. They have an awesome conference coming up in May. So anyone who's interested, I recommend you look at there. But we, Clean Energy Group, there is no like, if you have a question, if you are like, hey, I would love to have a webinar like this for my board, I'd love to have like a closed Q&A session for my community, we're available. That's what we do. It's not just if you want to develop a project, we are happy to provide any sort of awareness building informational resource we can. Our website, all of the case studies that I featured here today are on our website as like one pagers that you can download, and there's like 20 of them of different types of facilities. It's really meant to be, yes, we want to be able to offer your pre-development support to develop these projects, but wherever you're at, we usually have, we do have a resource to meet you there. And that's including like more wonky, if you want to, I like diving into the technical approach of like, what are the economics of solar and storage at different parts of the country and different facilities? Like if you need it, we got it. So if you ever have a question or you're feeling overwhelmed or you need to be directed to a resource, always feel free to reach out.